Okay.
My name is Raymond Ashagian with Amazing Woman Stories, and I have the pleasure of having my dear friend, the Honorable Betty Yee, with us today. She is the former California State Controller and the Vice Chair of the California Democratic Party. Betty, how are you this afternoon? And thank you
Hi,
again.
I am well, Raymond. Wonderful to join you.
It's truly a blessing to have you on this program, and I wanted to go into your background and if you wouldn't mind sharing your personal background, family background for all the viewers so that they can understand what you were dealing with when you were accomplishing all these amazing accomplishments in your profession.
Oh, thank you. It's always fun to share a little bit about each of our origin stories, but I will say that I think about it every day because we're here in California, and so many of us share, I think, the path of being, children of immigrants. My family came from China. My father, at a very young age, at the age of 14, to provide a better life for his future bride. He and my mother were in a prearranged marriage, and so as my father came over here, really lack of education got him to really think about having a livelihood in the laundry business. So he apprenticed in the laundry business in San Francisco, and his path to citizenship was enlisting in the United States Army during World War II and being in active duty over in Europe. It sounds like something out of a movie, but for
Amazing.
so many that came here, that was their path. And here we are today, still talking about pathways to citizenship, and that was my father's. He was able to bring my mother over to the United States in 1956, the year before I was born. And growing up, my father owned and operated his own laundry and dry cleaning business for over 30 years with my mother. There were six children in our household, so not a lot to go around in terms of resources, financial resources. But as I like to think back about the childhood I had, we were rich in values. We cared a lot about each other, about our family. We worked hard. My parents worked hard. The ethic of just doing anything that was required to provide for the family. And then my father's obviously service for his country, to his country, was really an inspiration for all of us to become members of public service, and that was what inspired me as well. I never thought I would go to college. We were too poor, and I happened to do very well in school. I was very good at numbers and always excelled in math, and I was able to acquire some scholarships that got me through college and also worked as well. But it wasn't something that my parents had in mind for us because they never saved up. It was very difficult for them to save up. And, growing up in the family laundry and dry cleaning business, I was the one that handled the books for them. So the bookkeeping, filing their taxes, doing the banking. So numbers came at a very young age to me. The value of a dollar, I learned very, very early. I negotiated with vendors for them because they didn't speak English very well. And as I thought about just some of the people with whom I interacted when I was just a young child. These salespeople would come by, wanting to sell zippers or shirt collar bands or wrapping paper for the laundry that my parents were providing for their customers. And if I couldn't negotiate a good price on a gross of buttons or a dozen zippers, it probably meant that we weren't going to have that carton of milk in the refrigerator that week. So it meant a lot to be very diligent and to work hard. Um, and so, as I think about my path, I share it with so many here in California, and I like to tell this story because at different points in my life, I was actually quite ashamed to tell my story because I felt that my
Wow.
parents were very different. They didn't have a regular job. They didn't leave the house to go to work. I wasn't able to be active in school activities because I always came home after school to help with the laundry and dry cleaning business. And so, but I grew to learn what that really provided for me, and that was really a lot of values that really are the foundation of how I live my life now, and certainly how I've applied them to my professional life.
Love it. Love it. Before we go into your professional life, obviously, as you are very well aware, I'm very fond of your life partner. Why don't you share that with our viewers as well?
Sure. My husband is a rabbi who has always been focused on social action and social justice. And I think for many of his generation and time, that was also a calling to service that was about how do we make the world better? How do we repair the world? And in the Jewish faith, the concept of tikkun olam, about repairing the world, which is just so much needed today. And so we travel this journey together. I do it in the public sector, public service realm, and he does it in the faith and interfaith realm.
So I can imagine that with what you just described, which is beautiful, he's been a critical part of your ability to succeed in your career and politics, and he's been right there, right side by side with you.
Absolutely. We all really rely on our supports in life, whether it be in our personal lives and how we just pursue the decisions that we make for ourselves and for our families, or in our professional lives. And what I will say about Stephen, my husband, is he understands public life. Being a rabbi is very difficult. There are a lot of demands on you. People look to you for guidance and to be a resource when they have challenges in their lives, and sometimes just to have a friend and a mentor. And I just am so grateful for his support in the work that I do. Obviously, in my public life, which also has similar demands, albeit different, serving the state of California. That understanding is so important because it is a 24/7 endeavor, and sometimes we recognize the sacrifices that it takes on our relationship, but the rewards far outnumber what we believe is our calling.
Yeah, well, as a friend, I can say that it's admirable and it's beautiful to see. So I
Thank
love it.
you.
I have to
Thank
tell
you.
you. You know, I love him and I love to hear about your relationship. I think that's fabulous.
Thank you.
Um, so going back to sort of your professional background, you mentioned you through scholarships you went to school. You were in the private sector originally, and you and I have been friends while you were California State Controller. But I know that your career started, I believe, in the private sector, and then you got into the public sector and entered politics. Will you share that sort of how that progressed and how you ended
Yes,
up as California State Controller?
absolutely. So, a couple of paths that really guided my journey into the public sector. First and foremost, at a very young age, and with certainly my parents not speaking English, I think for many children of immigrants, we're the translators. We are the best employees of their family business, although we don't get paid. That it is the experience where you're just exposed to a lot. And for me, as I mentioned, the facility with numbers and really understanding kind of the business aspect of running their business was something that I really took seriously. But also part of translating for them meant that I was an advocate for them, with government entities, with banks, certainly with our vendors. And there was an issue that came up when I was 13 years old, where my younger sister was going to be part of the first class to be bused across the city of San Francisco as part of the school desegregation program. My family was just one of four Chinese American families in the neighborhood. We had a local elementary school just 2 blocks away from my family business, and I was tasked by the four families to speak up at the local school board town hall meeting to basically oppose the busing program, not because we didn't support the goals of the program, but because it would create a hardship should anything happen with their children across the city. None of them drove. They all had small businesses. They would have to shut them down if an emergency arose, to take public transportation for well over 2 hours to bring home their child if an emergency arose at
Wow.
their school across the city. I remember making that statement at the age of 13. And even today, when I tell you this story, when I tell our listeners this story, I'm sitting down because I remember my knees were shaking. I had never spoken before in public.
At
And
13,
at
you were
13,
under that.
right. And so I
Wow.
made the statement on behalf of the four families, went back to my seat, and the busing program lasted for the better part of the next 30 years. So,
You must have been a very cute 13-year-old.
oh, I don't know about that. A very nervous 13-year-old, I'll tell you that. But nothing happened. I mean, the busing program was fine. My sisters all were fine. I have three younger sisters and a brother, and the busing program, went on as contemplated. But that experience just left an impression in my mind that I was a voice for someone. I was an advocate for someone, and I think as we think about just so many communities where we don't really understand their needs and their concerns, being an advocate is so important, to really be able to represent their views, their concerns, when they may not have the wherewithal and the means to, be in front of a local school board or be in front of their government officials to express their views and their concerns. And then the second thing that happened, my beginning in the private sector, I actually helped two women friends of mine begin a case management agency to serve the elderly. And the reason for this was because we saw the escalating prices of nursing homes for elderly people. And both of my friends are registered nurses and felt that there was a really healthier alternative, and that was how do we keep our elder loved ones at home for the longest period of time and be able to have them still experience independence and not have to rack up major bills of staying in a facility. And that was a very, very rewarding profession that actually had me interested in the whole healthcare arena. And my foray into public service really began in the 1980s when the HIV/AIDS crisis started. And there was very little information about what that disease was about, very much like what we just experienced with COVID. And so I began to look at bringing more resources back to our county public health departments, and went to Sacramento to do that work, and realized that there were very few women doing this work.
You were still in the private sector at the time, or you
I
had
was still
already
in the private sector at the time, but I was on
uh-huh.
a county public health commission
Uh-huh.
as an appointed member. And I was just encouraged then to stay in Sacramento and to really bring the experience I'd had at the county level to inform the funding decisions in Sacramento, which I was happy to do because I learned, Raymond, that when I went to Sacramento to advocate, there were very few, I could count on two fingers, the number of women who were advising decision makers about funding from the state budget at that time. And so it's different now. I'm happy to say it's much more of a diverse array of advisors, but back in the 1980s, there were very, very few. So I stayed after doing a Senate fellowship up there, and really that was the start of my longstanding state career.
Got it. And then can you go on as to at what point you decided to get involved in actually working for state government?
Sure. So when I completed a fellowship with the California State Senate, and I could have gone back to do more public health work, but I really felt it was important to have people who have been on the front lines, have seen, just the real concerns of Californians, whether they be elderly people, whether they be people who have been affected by HIV/AIDS, whether it's just being part of an education system that really wasn't equitable, for some parts of in my case, the city of San Francisco, and to have those voices inform the policy decisions. And so I made a conscious decision at that point in time after my fellowship to stay in public service, that you can't make these decisions in a vacuum. When I look at, and still to this day, when I think about the work that I've done in Sacramento for, over the better part of 3 decades, I never pretend to know what's in the best interest of those in Fresno County compared to LA County, compared to, San Francisco, to, the north part of the state. I think it's very important to have, just the voices of real people who are actually able to tell us, just where some of the barriers and the challenges are that keep them from being able to just recognize their full potential, and more importantly, to access important resources.
So when you made that switch, what was your first position in state government?
My first position in state government was they call them consultants, but really I was staff to the Senate Committee on Health and Human Services. And this was a place where I could bring my public health expertise, where I could also look at how we link the funding through our state budget process to funding the most important priorities in our state. And it was also a place where I could be innovative. And one of the first bills that I staffed for a legislator was an issue that we still are fighting for today, and that is to require that in-home caregivers be paid a minimum wage. And we all know that that work is so essential for people who have loved ones who require care at home. And most often, it's the family member that provides that care, uncompensated, by the way, but it also keeps that family member from being able to go to work and to be part of our economy. And so, to have a strong caregiving sector that we can look at as professionals, whom we can entrust with, just our most dear and vulnerable loved ones, and to have that be a more critical part of the economy that we can lift up, I think is work that still needs to be done today.
Got it. And at what point did you decide to actually run for a position?
Ah, that's a great question.
Which is
Never,
quite a
ever,
which is
never.
quite a step. I
It
mean,
was quite a step.
that takes a lot of courage.
Well, never, ever, 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 ever thought I would run for office. Never dreamt about it. Had always had some experience interacting with elected officials, and I always thought, they were up there, and I was just here, as a citizen of California, expressing my concerns. But it really became clear that as I began to hone my expertise in public finance and was becoming recognized as a resource in state budgets and finance and tax, that I had an expertise that could be helpful. And there was a position on the state's tax board that became open, that was going to become open. And I went to serve as the chief deputy for the member of that tax board. And mainly because I had just finished serving as Governor Gray Davis's budget director during his first 4-year term. And I was ready to do something different, and helped out this colleague of mine on the tax board, not ever realizing that she was only going to serve out half her term. And so, as soon as I went over to become her chief deputy and her chief of staff, automatically there was speculation that I was going to run for her seat. And I thought, people are crazy. You can't possibly be thinking I'm going to run for office. This never entered my mind. But it really became something that I recognized was something I had to do, because I looked at who was interested in running for the seat, and they were people who really didn't have an expertise. That this was a
They
way that
weren't really qualified.
they weren't qualified, and they wanted to use this as a stepping stone to higher office, whatever that may be. But this was a serious position. We heard tax appeals. We ruled for small businesses in the state. We took care of a lot of just tax rules that were confusing to taxpayers. And so we were in many ways advocates for taxpayers in California. And I just took that work very, very seriously. And I decided that I would throw my hat in the ring. And because I knew more than the others who had expressed interest. I will say that it was a daunting decision. I had never run for office before, but having seen how other elected officials work, I felt that I could find my own path to serving in the best way possible. We all bring different things to what we do professionally, and I did feel that both my personal and my professional experience up to that date were both going to be assets.
Entering this direction as far as an elected position, did you find it challenging being a woman and being Chinese American? And did you feel any resistance and lack of support?
Absolutely. So I would say back then, and I think it's improved quite a bit actually. But being a woman candidate, always, when you think about what it takes to run a successful campaign, obviously raising enough funds to get your message out, to let people begin to know you, to look at how. Um, your networks can be supportive of you, and when you think about kind of just the history of women, they don't have as strong a networks as men do, and so we have to create that.
How did you overcome that?
I have been doing this work for, by the time I ran, I was already doing this work for close to 20 years. And so I had quite an extensive database of contacts. And then just really taking my experience and selling the point that I was best qualified for this. And running for the Board of Equalization, it's a quarter of the state that I would be representing as a candidate. And what was very important was just being sure that people understood that I had a sense of fairness, that I would serve with integrity, and definitely had a public finance and tax background. But in some ways, that was less important than people just feeling like they were going to get a fair shake with me. And so that was something that I felt was an important thing to run on. I went to every corner and every county of the district that I would be representing, and did that for about 2 years, and was actually successful in my first run for office. But I would say as a woman, it's very difficult. Fundraising, I think back then, still, I often would have to ask 3, 4, times for a contribution, just to show that I was serious and that I was, persistent and was not going to let up, that I felt that I was the most qualified for this, and that I really meant that I was going to be successful at this. And in order for me to do that, I would need the support of so many to help me. So being a woman was definitely a challenge. And why I say that I believe it's improved somewhat is that today, Raymond, there are so many training programs for women candidates now, and so many support programs for women.
That's outstanding.
It is outstanding because and to really get an insider view about just what it's going to take. I think for some women, there's that classic line where women candidates always tend to get the questions about, well, how are you going to balance this with raising children? How are you going to balance this with a family? And it's there's so much more support for women now, to where the narrative is changing, and to the point of where we are able to say our experience with raising children is what makes us a better candidate. Our experience, running a business is what makes us a better candidate. Our experience, taking care of our loved ones, our elderly loved ones, is what makes us a better candidate. So I think all of that is a changing narrative for women that really uplifts our life experiences that are going to inform, the work that we do as public officials.
Well, I think we need more women in leadership positions. I think we're living at a time where, I mean, there's turmoil and chaos. And if we had more women in power, probably would be much better than what we're experiencing right now. So
Yeah,
I look forward to this constantly moving forward and increasing number of women getting into these strong positions. They're absolutely,
absolutely.
it's very clear that we're not doing too well right now. So
No,
we
no.
definitely need that diversification and more women in these leadership roles.
I agree. Now, Raymond, you
Moving,
also you also asked about being an API, and I want to just make one
yeah,
comment about this because when I served on the Board of Equalization, at one point there were four of the five members, so it's four members elected by district and the state controller. I was not the controller then yet; it was John Chung. But there, four of the members of the board were APIs. And I was so taken by that. And I remember sitting on the dais one day and saying, somebody's going to do a story about this. Four of us are, from the same community, albeit diverse. And sure enough, George Skelton with the Los Angeles Times did a column, and I thought, okay, he's going to make some statement, which I fully expect that we're all good at math, and this is what we gravitate towards: is that we go to the tax board.
that's interesting. Yeah,
And he did start there, but in his interview with me, he just asked, why I thought that was. And I said, well, I'll tell you why I think that is. Um, each of us is a descendant of immigrants. My parents, in my case, came over to this country. They ran a small business. They had a laundry and laundry and dry cleaning business, and if they weren't good at math, they probably weren't going to have a successful business. So they better darn well
yeah,
be good at math. And, that got passed down, through the generations. And so
business culture.
absolutely. And that is a story that I think is worth uplifting across all communities because, and now, the Board of Equalization has different duties. It's been reformed a bit, but I just remember hearing these cases that would come before the board, and you realize just how much of that experience just informed how you could get into the shoes of the business owner and about the decisions that they would make and why they made them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, will you share with our viewers what year you um, became California State Controller and your experience in that role?
Absolutely. I was elected in November 2014 and then reelected in November 2018 for my second and final term. And the controller's role is quite vast. I served as the chief financial officer for essentially, when I left office earlier this year, um, the fourth largest economy in the world. This is the government that oversees the fourth largest economy in the world, which means that for anyone here in California, you want to be sure that the government overseeing the fourth largest economy in the world is in good shape financially, that we're not racking up debt, that we're able to pay all of our bills, that we have a strong financial position, that we can make financial reports that give people confidence, particularly investors who want to come into California, to know that we're putting our money in the strongest priorities that will help continue to help have us have a strong and healthy economy. And over the 8 years that I served as controller, we never had to do any external borrowing to pay the bills for California. We managed the cash very, very well. We had some very, very good years during that. Even during the COVID-19 pandemic, the stock market was very kind to California, and so we were able to meet all of our obligations. It's turning a bit now. California, like everywhere else, is experiencing the inflationary pressures, not just with housing and certainly healthcare, but we now are looking at high energy costs that are really burdening households. And so we're going to be keeping an eye on that. And we may be entering into a recession, albeit most analysts thinking it will be mild and not as deep as what we experienced back in 2007 until 2009. So this is an office where it's about really keeping the state accountable for our finances. But there's also a policy role. I served on over 70 different boards and commissions by virtue of my office and my role as controller. That has jurisdiction over environmental policy, tax policy. I served on the boards of the nation's two largest public pension funds, the Public Employees Retirement System and the State Teachers Retirement
You've
System.
been busy.
I've been busy, and but it's so rewarding, Raymond, because in those roles, you have to just really take seriously that you are entrusted with the retirement security for over 3 million public sector workers and educators here in California.
That's a
And
lot of responsibility.
it is, and for educators especially, because they don't receive Social Security. This is their retirement security. So you want to be sure that we are making the best investments, getting the best risk-adjusted returns so that we can pay those benefits. And hopefully our retired teachers and public workers are still able to live in California in retirement.
Amongst all of these accomplishments, as I introduced you, you're the vice chair of the California Democratic
Yes.
Party. What's that like? Will you share a little bit on that?
Absolutely. Well, this is separate and apart from my professional life, but certainly I've been a lifelong Democrat. But the reason being that I believe that the Democratic Party is the party that has extended its big tent to everyone. I think for an immigrant like myself, or as a daughter of immigrants like my parents, but certainly for someone like myself, to be able to have a place in public office, to be able to have the ability to enjoy a first-class public education in the San Francisco Unified School District when I was growing up. I think the Democratic Party has really been just one that upholds all of those values. I decided to run for vice chair of the party because I too, as you just mentioned earlier, believe that our elected officials should look more like California. And particularly when I look at local government races. Whenever I used to travel in my role as controller, because our different boards and commissions would meet in different parts of the state, I would always just spend an extra day having community conversations in different parts of the state. And it was clear that there were many, many areas of California where the leadership still did not reflect the changing demographics. And I'm happy to say we're making some very, very good progress in that. But I also think that being involved in a political party, and this is the less partisan piece of it, everyone, and we hear today that our democracy is under attack, right? And the fundamental to our democracy here and throughout the world is the right to vote. And that's something that should not be taken for granted. And so everywhere I go, and certainly everything that we do as a party, is about how do we ensure that we have the fullest participation in our democracy, because it really doesn't work unless everyone has the ability to fully participate in it. And so for those who aren't registered to vote, we get them registered. For those who are registered to vote, we make sure they vote. And more importantly, stay engaged. Like hold our elected officials accountable. The work doesn't stop just because we voted our favorite person in, that we want to be sure that our concerns and needs are being heard, that every one of us is being heard and being seen relative to being part of this, what I think is our greatest strength in California, and that's our great diversity.
Well, outstanding accomplishments on your part. The stories are endless of everything you've accomplished, and I guess it's there's more to follow, and there's a great future ahead. With that being said, do you have something you want to share with our viewers of your inspirational advice for the women that are going to watch and listen to you?
I think for all of us, there's an amazing story within each of us. And I think what I would say to uh, those who are joining us here is find that story and give voice to it. It is, you never know just how you're going to touch another, right? And while I like to talk about, the background that I have with my family, and as we've had this conversation today, so many, others share the same path, but don't necessarily speak about it. I also think that when we talk about our stories, it's a way of connecting, but it's also a way of just highlighting that we're not alone on this journey. That I never thought I would be elected to public office. I'm making darn sure that I'm not just going to end being the 10th woman elected to statewide office. We now have a 10th, 11th, 12th, and 13th, and I want more. So that is my personal commitment. But I want every woman who particularly to think about how they can serve in a larger role, and really bring and lean into your life experience and your origin story to help inform that work, because it is rich. It is a guaranteed way of connecting with so many others. And more importantly, it is time, as you say, to have women at every level of decision making that I think will really improve the quality of life for all of us.
Well, thank you so much, Betty, and we look forward to your continued success and the next chapter in your journey, which is going to be amazing.
Thank you,
All
Raymond.
right. Thank you, Betty.